Hello and welcome to The Digital Insight, the technology, procurement and supply chain podcast that delivers valuable C-level perspective into the core issues surrounding business transformation and digital disruption. Each episode will bring you the most inspiring executive insights from those who are leading transformation strategies within the world's biggest and best-known companies. The Digital Insight. Disrupt, transform, evolve.
Welcome to The Digital Insight, the official podcast series for CPO Strategy and Interface magazines. In today's episode, I welcome back Mike Cadieux, Procurement Fanatic and founder of Procurement Foundry. Mike and I discuss the role of the procurement professional, and as the procurement function continues to evolve, it's time for the professional to truly get to know the business around them. Mike, welcome back.
Thanks, Dale. I appreciate you having me back. I'm really excited for our next conversation.
So in our previous episode, we spoke about the sort of transformation and evolution of procurement and how it's just seemingly never ending. It's just continuously changing and transforming. And today, I want to focus a little bit more on the impacts of the procurement professional themselves. So looking over your sort of career journey then, in your time in procurement, how, if you could sum up nice and broadly, how would you say the expectations and the sort of required skill sets of somebody working in procurement and supply chain has changed dramatically since when you started?
Wow, that's a really good question. Given the fact that I've been in this about 20 years now, the expectations, the skill sets, the day-to-day, happenings of a procurement person have changed dramatically over the last 20 years. So yeah, and what's interesting is it seems to be speeding up. I don't remember a point in time where the change was at a place where it's constantly changed. So there's no more normal. I guess change is the new normal. I know that's a cliche saying, but that's really where procurement and sourcing are at today. Absolutely, but absolutely no question about it.
And sticking with yourself then, as you've sort of navigated this, changing environment, this changing role, what have you had to do to sort of keep up with that change, to continuously challenge yourself, to push your own boundaries so that as that change happens, you're changing and you're not falling behind?
Yeah, great question again. I think that it's interesting. I think from an executive standpoint, in the last decade, I've been kind of at the senior levels, at the procurement officer level. I think the changes at that level are actually different than what takes place at the lower practitioner levels. And lower is probably a bad word, but the team member levels. The category managers, the multi-category leads, the individual sourcing analysts. I think what's happening down at those levels is one thing. What's happening up at the executive levels is a completely different thing. And where I've been for the last decades at the executive level, and it seems to be in different buckets. So, for example, the skills that you need now at the executive level inside of procurement and sourcing definitely have changed. When it first started, it was a lot about just being able to handle the workflow associated with the quantity of programs and deals and vendors and things like that you had to deal with. And a lot of rolling up your sleeves and getting into the actual contracts and working with some of the stakeholders. And it was very reactive back then. You'd get called into a meeting with the head of a department and they'd be like, hey, I've done all this preliminary work and now I need you just to come in and kind of hammer the price, right? And certainly in one regard, we're doing a lot more than just price negotiation now than we've ever had done before. But over the last probably 5 to 7 years, procurement, sourcing, supply chain management, all of that really has started to it's come out of the shadows and is really now a strategic part of what's happening at the operational level for any mid to large enterprise class company, because we make dramatic impacts in a lot of cases associated with operational costs, EBITDA, margin control, risk management and the supply chain associated with the cost of goods that are being produced for the company, which then leads to sales and margin. So certainly that role at the enterprise level, at the executive level, has changed from more of a single contributor doer to much more strategy, much more relationship based inside of the operating team of a company at the C levels, and almost a geopolitical role where you're spending a lot of time on the road, a lot of time with department heads, a lot of time talking about the programs that you're developing and the strategies, and getting to know the other parts of the business. I can remember years ago, I really didn't know much about what my company did. And now it's almost essential that you have a very good understanding of what your company does and the individual departments that do that, and divisions, so that you can understand and help them navigate through the cost management side of their business.
And sticking with that, you raise an interesting point, and one that I've sort of heard in different words before, is as you're getting to know the other parts of the business. So, I found it quite interesting there. You said that, many years ago, you didn't really know what the business did. You were, as a procurement professional, as a sourcing professional, were kind of brought in at the last part to say, right, let's just rubber stamp it and let's just get this bit, let's close this deal, or let's get this part finished, and then go back and do your procurement stuff elsewhere. But as you've gone around businesses and gone around the organization to get to know the different people, the different functions, how has the communication changed? How have you had to, you're a professional who's been in this space your entire career, so it's your second language, but to other parts of the business, it's relatively new to them. So how do you go about communicating the value, the in and outs of procurement to a team member or a function that hasn't really had any experience in that regard?
Yeah, great point. The language changes depending upon who the stakeholder is that you're talking to inside of the organization. I'll give you an example. When I'm dealing with my peers in finance, I'm talking a lot about margin and trade working capital and days outstanding, for payables. And I've had to go out and learn the verbiage that they use to manage their aspect of the business, so that I can almost, I don't want to call it be respected, but be accepted into the conversation, right? If you don't speak their language or lingo, they really kind of look at you as the guy at the end of the table who doesn't know enough about their business to add any value, and they kind of shut you down and block you out. But when you start to have a conversation around the fact that, hey, I'd like to introduce a new program around our vendor population. I've been working with, Treasury on our cost of capital and our trade working capital improvements. And I think we can move that by 50 to 75 basis points, which is, 0.5% to 0.75% in translation. When you can start to talk to them in that language, all of a sudden everybody perks up and wants to know what you can contribute. I'll give you another one. In the HR world, if you're talking to HR leadership, they're going to want to talk to you about things like their attrition rate and their cost of new talent acquisition, and what it costs for what can we do to help them, with their onboarding processes. What can you do to help them associated with training, and all of those things contribute to reducing their voluntary attrition and non-voluntary turn of their employees. And then what about talent? How can procurement help with the talent acquisition process? Because new talent really is what companies are growing on these days. So I think it's very, very important now to be able to speak the language. And again, going back to that point of knowing the business and being there at the inception point, being invited into those planning meetings, annual planning sessions at the department level, versus just being the guy down the hall or the woman down the hall who gets the contract in there. I affectionately call it the dull, blunt instrument, right? You're just the person that comes in to hammer the vendor at the end of the conversation. Now it's a lot different than it used to be, for sure.
And picking apart a little bit of that, then looking at that vendor relationship, then How has that relationship changed in the sense that now, as the procurement professional, as the sourcing, as the the supply chain manager, that sort of role, now that you have more understanding, more awareness, you're more tuned in to what's happening at the other parts of the business, how does that reflect and impact that supplier relationship? Because essentially you're now going into that relationship or negotiation, that deal, whatever it is, with more informed knowledge than say before, because you're more in the know of what's going on in the business. So how has that relationship changed?
Yeah, yeah, it does translate over into the vendor relationships as well, as you point out. The vendor relationship is changing as well, um, similarly to how the internal relationships work. And again, I'll go back to the dull blunt instrument because I heard you chuckle there when I said that. The relationship with the vendor population used to be you were just a grinder. And in a lot of cases, it still is that way. And I think those are probably the procurement or supply chain organizations that are kind of laggard behind, where you're just somebody who's responsible for getting the price down. And I think that what's happening now with the knowledge of the business and being more strategic in your thought process is how to approach the vendor relationship less from a vendor supplier perspective and more from a strategic partner perspective, and knowing who and what population inside of your vendor population you actually want to make that transition with, right? You can't have 10,000 vendors and 10,000 partners. It doesn't exist. I used to kid around that I had 13,000 vendors and five partners, right? Um, but I think that making or getting the relationship now, I think your role more now is about getting the vendor relationship to a true partnership. And by partnership, I mean setting up your vendors for success and letting them understand as much about your business as you understand, because you're not going to be able to keep track on all the products and services that a mega vendor like a Microsoft or an Oracle or some of the big supply chain management organizations have. They've got hundreds of products inside of their arsenal. You have to trust the person across the table in the vendor relationship now to be able to understand enough about your business and understand enough about their product offerings to be able to strategically add value, and bring that to you on a proactive basis versus a reactive buy only basis, so that you can almost use them in your tool set to create that value proposition and be more strategic. And that's where I think the relationships really need to evolve to from a vendor management side of the house.
So you mentioned talent a moment ago when you talked about HR and having a sway and a bit of a conversation there around how sourcing procurement can influence that part of it. So looking at talent then, when I speak to people, when I read about what's happening in the procurement space right now, much like any industry, there's always talk of skills gap, talent, the future generations of workers and what work needs to be done to ensure they're the right type of people and they want to come in and that sort of thing. Looking at it just sort of from your own career perspective, so you say you've operated on the executive level, you've seen firsthand the sort of shifting mindsets, the shifting demands. You've when you have that conversation, when you look at what talent is needed, or when someone needs to say, well, we need to look at attracting new people. How does your own personal experience influence those conversations? So, whereas some people might panic and just say, well, we need talent, we need it now. But you've lived and breathed it, you've seen this shift. How does that shape that conversation for you?
I'm assuming you mean talent with inside of a sourcing organization or a procurement organization, and how and what you're looking for in talent inside of those, right? So what the listeners are looking for,
Yeah.
both from how they can develop their own talent skill sets, and then hiring managers and what they're looking for and what they need to be thinking about down the road. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right. So I think, listen, everybody's talking about EQ, everybody's talking about soft skills. There is absolutely no question, as we move away from the paper pushers of old and just the people down the hall who hey, I found a vendor, I love them, they fit within my budget. You now go negotiate and be the dull blunt instrument. Now we're adding a lot of value and being asked to actually be consultative in our approach, and that requires us to have a lot of soft skills. You have to be able to build relationships. You have to be able to do active listening. You have to do needs analysis and requirement. You're really a mini consultant now down the hall on a specific topic, or you need to know how to communicate. I've seen folks that are coming out of schools and they've got some basic communication skills. You need to be able to understand the business that you're in now. Like I mentioned, knowing what business what your company does, right? And those are having empathy. Certainly is a huge need inside of procurement and sourcing now. Being able to understand the position that your stakeholder is in and the fact that they've got 300 things on their plate today and how you can help them. And by helping them, you become a trusted colleague down the road, right? So certainly a lot of soft skills. Then when you get into more of the quantitative skills, I certainly see at the single contributor levels, team lead levels, lots and lots of technology related skill set necessary. So I think that, I don't think that you can learn enough about data analytics, data analysis, what's out there. If you're not learning Power BI or Tableau or some type of data presentation level to help in your data presentation and consumption levels, then you're probably behind on that. If you don't understand, how to categorize spend analysis and build maybe even a spend cube. I see a lot of people right now in procurement going back to school for data analytics classwork. So I think that that's probably one of them. And it's all being driven by the digitalization of sourcing as an industry, right? We've got tons and tons of software now. I think that there's a lot of folks in the procurement business, sourcing industry that aren't what's called digital natives. They haven't been surrounded by technology their whole lives, right? And consuming and learning new technology is a challenge for them. I think you have to throw yourself into it full bore. There are, people building negotiation platforms right now with AI integrations. A lot of people in procurement don't understand, what AI or machine learning even is, right? We're talking about, alternative currency models that are emerging, like, some of the cryptocurrencies and barter systems and, programmatic buying platforms inside of advertising and marketing. If you're not staying aware of that and doing knowledge management and continuous learning after hours, you're going to fall behind quickly on those skill sets.
And how much is there an onus on the organizations themselves to help with that process? So you mentioned there about doing the work after hours. You mentioned people going back to school. What sort of balance is there in terms of, well, this is what you need to be doing by yourself, and this is what a business, the organization, can provide for you? Like, how much of it is sort of a two-way street, or is it just you need to pick up, or you need to go, or you'll be gone?
I think it's a two-way street. Sure, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of opportunities inside of companies for you to raise your hand and say, "Hey, I'll take a look at that." I think that we could all go back and read Who Moved My Cheese again. You know what I mean? And raise your hand and just move on to the next roadblock and get past it. I think that there's a talent shortage in procurement and sourcing like never before. And if you can raise your hand and say, "Hey, I'll take on that quantitative analysis project or that spend analysis problem that we've had." Spend data visibility is still probably the number one problem inside of procurement and sourcing today, right? Not knowing exactly what your spend is. You raise your hand and say, "I'm going to tackle that for us as a team." You're going to start to learn about what spend looks like, what systems that data's in, how to cleanse it, how to categorize it, how to compartmentalize it, and then how to take that data and create some type of visible layer so that you can make actions out of it in graphs and charts and things like that. So I think that internally, I think that there's a lot of opportunities, and you just need to step up and talk to your leadership team about it, about what what their availability is. Externally, I think that you probably need to do some outside reading to keep up, and that's what I meant by after hours type activity. So I think that you probably there's plenty of free content out there. LinkedIn, every day there's a webinar about quantitative analysis or spend analytics or things like that. And there's plenty of online courses now that you can take as well. There's plenty of fantastic books that are being published every day, ebooks, everything like that. Because if you're not doing it, someone else is doing it. That's for sure.
And you mentioned something there about you said about talking to leadership teams, raising a hand, asking questions. One of our previous guests, Frank Varath, who works in supply chain at Gartner, he talked about how he would like to talk about the idea of a mentorship and a mentor, or like sort of role models within an organization in terms of bridging that skills gap. And he mentioned about how businesses now are shaping their models, so their procurement models, so that there's going to be people in a team, in an organization, an executive who's seen as a sort of a procurement role model and a mentor to help basically influence and shape and essentially claw back that skills gap. Is this something you've seen yourself, or you're starting to see, where businesses are having that kind of role model or mentor figure from a procurement perspective?
I see it, yes. So yeah, absolutely. I think, the junior to mid-level range folks inside of these organizations are looking to senior leadership to mentor them and guide them along their career path and their knowledge needs. Certainly, no question about it. There's a lot of, and I don't think it's just inside of procurement. I think that some really creative leaders that I've seen inside of this space are bringing in people from other areas of the business. I know one gentleman, for example, that's doing a lot of what he calls mentor up, which is you're spending 75 to 80% of your time on your current role and 20% of the time shadowing the person whose role you want to be in next, right? I know a woman who runs a very large procurement organization out in the Midwest, and she does brown bag lunches probably once a month, and she brings in knowledge leaders from other areas of the business just to educate the procurement team on what's happening in marketing and advertising, or what's happening in HR and benefits, what's happening in the finance and treasury side of the business. So they're creating these opportunities for knowledge expansion and transfer inside. So there's definitely a lot of, whether it's formal mentorship or informal mentorship, and that's just within inside the company. One of the things I'm noticing, because of the fact that I operate a very large community online with Procurement Foundry, is there's a lot of people that are looking for mentors outside of their business to get a completely fresh, I don't know, I don't want to call it untainted, but a completely different view into where their career may need to go. A lot of people are looking to find mentors outside of where they currently work to get a fresh set of eyes on A, their career, B, their knowledge set, skill sets, and things like that. And that's amazing to see how many folks are actually A, looking for that, and B, what the need is on both sides, which is very, very interesting. On the mentor-mentee relationship, everybody seems to think that, and naturally so, everybody thinks that the majority of the value proposition is actually with the mentee. So somebody who's looking for guidance. There's a lot of mentors that I talk to, they get an amazing amount of value out of the conversations that they have with the people that they mentor. So the mentors, I don't think you can discount or overlook how valuable that is for actually the mentor as well as the mentee. I think it's definitely a two-way street. In fact, in a lot of cases, I think the mentor gets more value out of it than the mentee.
What would you say is, obviously over the course of your career, has been one piece of advice that someone may have given you, sort of sticking with that mentee, even if it's unofficially a mentor, but one piece of advice that someone's given you that you've really stuck by in terms of just sort of handling and remaining, not remaining, remaining at the very forefront of the change that's happening around you in procurement. One thing that someone said that's you've sort of gone, that's you've always lived by as the procurement world around you continues to change.
Don't be afraid of change. I've made a career out of consuming change. We just did a salary and compensation survey and released that job hopping, be it internally or externally, provides a lot more compensation value than staying in your lane. Don't be afraid to raise your hand and take on a new opportunity, even if it's outside of your current realm. Just the fact that you're willing to raise your hand and take on an opportunity shows the leadership team that you're willing to take the risk and to put in the extra effort. If you do fail at it, at least you tried, right? Failure is an expectation of leadership. We don't expect everybody to be perfect 100, 1,000% of the time, 100% of the time. But we are looking for those people inside of our organizations who are willing to step on and take on new challenges. So I think probably the best advice I was ever given was always raise your hand for the new opportunity that's in the room, and always try to hustle. You got to work. A lot of this stuff takes a lot of work and effort. If you're just punching the clock and going home, you're gonna survive because there's a talent crisis right now. But you're certainly not gonna accelerate your career, your goals, and your aspirations. And then finally, probably the other piece of advice that I was given really, really on is, if you don't love what you do, go find something else that you really enjoy doing. Life is a pretty short period of time we're on this rock, and if you don't enjoy what you do, you probably need to go find what you do enjoy and find a career path in that, because it's going to reflect in your work and in your relationships with the people around you.
No, absolutely. And final question then. Say, and this will tie in nicely with your ambition, again, as we mentioned last time, to make procurement cool. Say I'm a young professional who's just about to start his career, and I come up to you at a trade fair or job fair or something, and I say, oh, procurement, and supply chain manager, and this whole field. What is all this? What is it? Like, would this be something that I should be interested in? If you've got on the spot right there, how would you sell it as a career? How would you say, and what would make it cool to them?
Yeah, somebody asked me this the other day. They were like, how do we make procurement cool? And I said, I don't think people understand that procurement really is just a professional shopper. Like, if you enjoy shopping, this is what it is, right? You're shopping for an enterprise with somebody else's credit card. It's fantastic. I love it. If you enjoy going out and looking for bargains and trying to help people who you are your peers or your stakeholders to help them succeed, then this is for you. Is it always easy? No. Do you have to get over the fact that at its nature, procurement and sourcing and supply chain management is essentially creating conflicts of interest between a vendor and a buyer, a partner and a buyer? Yeah, you have to be able to withstand the conflict part of it and get over that, because it's human nature to avoid conflict, right? But I tell people all the time, like, I guess over Thanksgiving or over the holidays, my family asks me what I do, and I say I'm a professional shopper. and that usually starts the conversation going. So it's a cool way to look at it a different way, right?
Thank you for listening to the Digital Insight Podcast in association with the Interface.net and CPOstrategy.com. The Digital Insight is brought to you by B2E Media Limited. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to subscribe, rate and review. And don't forget to check out our podcast archive at www.b2e-media.com/The Digital Insight.